Hello everyone, welcome back to Dan's Astrology. This is Dan. The date is the 2nd of January, the first video I'm recording in 2025. And on this day of January the 2nd, there is a dramatic opposition between Mars and Pluto. And I have to admit that I am recording this on the day that I'm going for my medical treatment. I live in British Columbia, where we have recently had an election won by the NDP, and I am the proud or the happy recipient of a socialized healthcare for my autoimmune problems. And the thing is, I notice that when for some reason, on the days when I have to get this treatment, though, I tend to be kind of moody about it. And I tend to be kind of grumpy and stuff like that. And I've been noticing that there is also this whole kind of, like, perhaps moods and emotions that gets stirred up around, like, the holiday season. And I have to admit, I didn't go out, do anything for New Year's or anything like this. And there's this idea of being feeling kind of frustrated. And the thing is, I don't like, it could just be that I notice after I get this treatment done that there's a sense of sort of like inner friction or frustration that I feel that is on, it could be an emotion level or also a kind of a resistance in the body, right? And there's some kind of interesting thing where I can see that on a day like this, we have Mars opposite Pluto in Aquarius. I have been... There's something about it where I actually feel like I'm getting better with this, but part of that has been part of a process of, for one thing, working with a therapist. Although, just to have an outlet to maybe talk about some of the things that frustrate me rather than bottling them up. And also, from that therapist keeps encouraging me to write, so I've started a blog, right? And I'm using this as just a brief opportunity, anyways, to pitch my Substack blog, which is... I decided not to make it about astrology, and the idea is that, like, I have a lot of things on my mind, a lot of things that interest me that may go into influencing what I come up with my astrology content, but that there might be certain things that may be valuable to talk about on their own, and it just gets complicated if you try to make it all about the astrology, right? And a lot of that, I'm kind of starting from this place about talking about whatever my past conditions with mental health issues or whatever, but there's some sort of there's a common pattern that I find where I had a lot of frustration and whatever, I guess you could say resentment, or about when I had to go through a forced treatment thing with mental health. And the thing about this is that there's something, maybe it kind of feels like you kind of like you work yourself out of one pattern and you just get stuck in another one, and it seems like in some way it just feels like the same thing to me. But at the very least, I have to say that, like, the drug that I'm on, in terms of, if you just look at what the side effects are like, or what the experience of being on the drug is like, as opposed to not being off of it, it's not like all kinds of drugs and all kinds of medical treatments are the same. And that I actually, like, for me anyways, it's kind of funny because it's like I feel like I had this experience anyways where I was though, if there's anything to be like, I don't think there's anything to be really frustrated about in terms of if I have a health condition that I didn't like. Everybody might have different health conditions, and that if you have access to a treatment that would otherwise be expensive if I was living in another country, there's not no real reason to be. If anything, I should be thankful that I have such like. It took me, if anything, I have relatively easy access to this treatment. It took me a while to get approved for it. I was kind of like in a not a very comfortable position, right? But there's this kind of a thing of that. This is all covered on from my provincial government, which again, I'm happy that I believe in public health care. I'm happy that the NDP are in power here. But there's still this like basic underlying sense of like frustration and resentment, and I don't really know. But the thing is, there's something about it where I feel like so often, I'm using this as an example because there's certain, I notice when it comes to this things like the emotions of frustration and resentment and stuff like that, there's an idea that when we're in our like normal state of consciousness, right, that we have the experience of one kind of, usually one point of identification, which we call the ego, right? But what that is like we are taking in so many inputs all at once, right? We have so many sensory inputs, and what the ego, if anything, is filtering out all this stuff, and what it likes to hang out at a certain kind of position that it finds comfortable, but it may be picking up signals that are being like that are mostly being filtered up, but there's signals that are coming in that work their way into the consciousness through a kind of either a bad mood or a pain in the neck or like some kind of tension or some kind of like there's this kind of like under subconscious. So there's something about that I feel like I don't know if I'm like to understand what's going on with like a medical condition or like there's, to me it feels connected, the emotion of feeling either upset or frustrated or angry or being afraid or something, and the suppression, trying to suppress those emotions, and then the return of the repressed, like these sort of like eruptions in the body or something like that, right? And I'm just lucky anyways that this drug is working out pretty well for me. I have been noticing, like I feel like certain parts of my skin are like on the verge of having a rash, but they're not. There's a certain sort of like the cold winter air and this sort of feeling of. But there's this kind of funny because in some way I feel like I'm less frustrated now. But what I'm doing is that I'm kind of trying to pitch. There's some underlying frustration that's motivating my my intention to write a blog, basically, right? Like there's some kind of like, and the thing is, it's like at some level, I don't want. There's what I'm trying to suggest is that there may be certain tension points or certain points of like where it feels like there's the aggravation of some kind of issue, but it's like I often think about this one example that I had this happened years ago, but it's just like I created this as my own kind of code for my own reference for this phenomenon, and it has to do with sibling stuff. I don't want to like bring up too much of like the interpersonal family things, but there's one time when my sister had a bag of corn chips, and she got really angry about me eating some tortilla chips, and like I'm just sort of like, it seemed to me that like the importance of whether or not she had the whole bag of chips to herself was kind of like insignificant, but the idea is that like there could be a whole pile of frustration, that it's kind of like that, like the straw that breaks the camel's back. This is what I'm kind of getting at here with especially with Mars and Pluto, right? Because what Pluto stands for is something that is very small, but despite being small, it's like powerful, or that it could be like triggering, or that there could be like the straw that breaks the camel's back, or like some like micro thing. But then there's also that micro thing could be something that has perhaps a healing potential, or that it could be like the medicine where we're just like we're gonna go in this really like minuscule, minute, like molecular physics kind of level to like address some kind of a problem, and there you go, or something like that, right? Like there's something like the microscopic and the macroscopic is a kind of a theme of Pluto, right? But there's part of that though is that with our senses of like anger or frustration or resentment, it's like there's this thing that like so often the real issue at hand is sort of obscured to us, and instead we experience our life as a kind of reactivity to like you don't know. You first of all you create your ego center. You want to like affirm probably positive thinking, or you want to put on a good attitude, or even if it is fake and phony, it's necessary sometimes to sort of like present a professional image to present to the world for the sake of just being agreeable and getting along, and that has, despite any frustrations, that has utilitarian value in and of itself, right? So you can there, but despite the fact that we're on the kind of like in order to get by in a kind of like corporate world or whatever, everybody has to like put on a big smile and do good cheery customer service and stuff like that. And in that dynamic, no one's, that could be like putting on a suit and tie and going to work or something like that. It just is necessary to make things move, right? To make things function. But there's something that's omitted or repressed that is, you don't have time to think about that because you have to focus at the job at hand. So it becomes part of the sort of whole cloud of vague resentment and frustration. And that could be like, come out as in terms of like you go to the lunchroom and you see somebody having your corn chips and you snap and explode at them, right? And could become the kind of like Pluto, the power. There could be also these things that are like the Jungians often talk about how even one of the things that interests me about Jungian archetypes is that you don't have to go to some jungle somewhere and trip out on some, crazy hallucinogenic vine in the name of like having a vision quest to experience the archetype. The thing, what's interesting about Jungian psychology is that the archetype is always present no matter what. And it's just sometimes it's just there in the most absolute mundane of things or things that we don't glamorize. There's a tendency, I think, with a problem with the Jungian archetypes and the archetypal psychology in general is that there's some power, obviously, of these archetypes to kind of possess people and take over them, but there is also this tendency towards the glamorization, right? And that if we're only looking for it in the glamorous circumstances of life, we could be missing the fact that we're embedded in an archetypal situation all the time. And even just the if somebody takes your corn chip and your power and your boundaries have been violated or something, I'm just using that as a kind of a neutral example, but there could be all kinds of like seemingly insignificant things that it's not really the actual thing that triggers you is like the tip of the iceberg, right? It's this tiny little thing that triggers something else that is like this huge, massive, there's a gargantuan archetype, and it's only the little tiny point that you can see is like this somebody stealing your chips in the lunchroom, or some sparking a kind of envy or jealousy or something. I'm not really, there could be any sort of thing which does it, right? And in all this, right, there's the idea of you could say that there is a basic force of resistance, right, and that the force of resistance is actually kind of like inherent to reality itself. And, you could draw a connection to talking about electronics, right? Because electronics, you need to have resistors and capacitors and all these kind of things which hold the charge of the signal, right? There's some kind of basic, you may have heard the line from some New Agers, do not resist the resistance, right? So that, you can or there's people are trying to get into some kind of a flow state, or what they want to manifest something, or they want to like have good vibes only, and then but there's some kind of inherent resistance that's there in reality itself as a necessary metaphysical kind of law, right? That there is always going to be some resistance, and it's just that the with under this sort of Mars Pluto, like there's something about this where I think there's like some it could also be like the strength card, right? Like there's if there you're trying to tame the wild lion or something like that, the lion is going to resist at some basic level, right? There's going to be you won't if the lion didn't resist, it wouldn't be called the strength card. It would be just the docile submission card. You know what I'm saying? Like you need so the whole having the strength card there needs to have a little bit of resistance in the friction between one force and the other force interplaying with each other, striking a kind of a balance, or else there's not going to be the party just ain't happening, right? You're gonna have to. It's not gonna be that kind of a situation, right? So there's some basic, I think, inherent resistance in reality that comes out either as frustration, resentment. In the obvious thing too is that Friedrich Nietzsche uses this whole conversation that I'm talking about. There's like what I'm saying is there's first of all the necessity to present a certain false self, which is, I mean, the thing about the false self that people talk about is a kind of like that you have your authentic self, which is a kind of like pure essence, and then you have your false self is a sort of constructed defense mechanism against the problem or coping strategy against what's going on in the world, and your false self is depending on the situation you're in. It could have to be very tough, right? It could be like that's how you get by, or it could have to be very like a people pleasing. Yeah, your false self could be developed around a number of strategies to people please other people, right? And all of these kinds of things, whether this is to be to have a hardened shell or to have a soft people-pleasing demeanor, it's all a strategy to cope with the force of resistance of the outside world, right? Or of the inherent that you have some sort of difficulty. You can play good cop, bad cop. Right? You can try to be like a people pleaser. You can try to coddle. You can try to use an appeasement strategy. But meanwhile, you may be that might just be a mask that you put on to be. And meanwhile, you're thinking like, screw this guy, right? And you've got this sort of like you have to inhabit the position of being a very friendly, positive person. But then under the surface, there's some sort of return of the repressed and some kind of friction. Or else, in the other circumstance, you could have built up an elaborate personality of defense of being just tough and intimidating. And if something gets in your way, you try to, it's like the good cop, bad cop thing. You try to intimidate the other thing. But then that is also perhaps just a hard shell that you wear, and that's not, maybe you're actually a big softie underneath it, right? But that softie is too vulnerable to be exposed to the outside world, right? But anyways, so in either situation, there could be a dynamic between the resentment that occurs because there's a imperative to deal with the world through inauthentic coping strategies or approaches at solving a problem, making things work in a smooth and efficient way that are somehow you're getting some kind of signal that there's some other side of the equation that's kind of just out of balance, or that there's some kind of what Friedrich Nietzsche was basically dealing with the same problem, and he used the idea of bad conscience, right? That if you try to put on this personality that is adapted and just makes things go, there's some underlying thing where, like, okay, we can do this, we can make this all work, but at the end of the day, do we have a clear conscience about the whole thing? That we really can we do this whole thing regardless of whether it's authentic or whether it's fake or whether it's a cope or whether it's a survival strategy or whatever? Can we do this? And then are we left with a clear conscience that we really did the best we could, and that what we are doing is fair, balanced, and in alignment with the truth of reality that we all know in our hearts to be true, in a kind of it's in authentic alignment with our own inner being, but so often the world that we live in, we feel like it's always just a compromise. It's always just there's some kind of inherent thing that's off about it, or that we have to just put up with the fact that we live in a world that is just frustrating because it doesn't meet our personal preferences or opinions or something, and that our own attachment to everything being in a different way than it is simply our own, what's keeping us chained to the cycle of samsara, the infinite cycle of death and rebirth, where we're just fated to repeat the same mistakes over and over and over again until we somehow learn better. And then until then, we will just, instead of having a way to address the problem, to get to the root of the issue, to understand what's really creating this sense of frustration, we are going to be living our lives in a state of reactivity. And what does this mean? It means that you may have serious issues in your life which you're not resolving. Instead, you just choose to get upset at the person who ate your corn chip, or the person who, maybe you try to fight somebody because you think they're eating too many chocolate cakes and they're not watching their diet or something. It becomes a power game where you don't even know what is wrong with your life, but you can see this person who wants to lose weight while they're eating cheesecake, and you're just like, what, can I tell you how, you're a hypocrite? No, I have to put on this nice happy face and just be like, oh, well, you can just, but the thing is, there's this kind of idea that everybody is doing the best that you can be like, I'm doing the best that I can to get over my addiction, while at the same time kind of displaying that obviously I'm not making any effort to improve at all, right? And there's a certain inherent kind of like falsity about it. There's a certain kind of like bullshit inherent in that. But we're just, it's like Neil Young said, whatever gets you through the night, that's okay with me. So we just basically we've got all this stuff, there could be an enormous amount of bullshit that's just inherent to the system itself, and that it's a part of that bullshit factor means that we have to go through this whole thing with a kind of inherent bad conscience, and that because this whole thing is structured so that we can't actually address the problems that really matter to us, we instead just have to have stupid frustrations about the most minor petty things, right? There could be also, and then this is the thing, is that the world itself, we have to respect the world from a kind of an animistic point of view, I believe, because I honestly think that the world is like a magical place, right? And that we can't just treat any thing going on in the world like as if it's, well, this is the thing, is that if you do this thing where you create a magical circle, you can create a certain space or a container in which you can say that while I'm doing this thing, the stuff that exists inside the circle is of a highly charged, symbolic, resonant value, and that allows the rest of the world to just, it doesn't have to fulfill that function, right? But unless you have that, what you're going to end up having is you're going to just be like bombarded by all sorts of like synchronicities and like random, a chaos of forces just playing off each other, because there's like, and in all this, right? There's something about we don't want to give in to the forces of resentment, frustration, all that kind of stuff, because well, it's suggested anyways that like what we are doing is that we are producing a negative emotion, which basically, despite any speculation about things like, demonic forces or something like that, like the basic thing is that our reality as people on Earth isn't defined by we're all grateful for living in a world where we're privileged with such abundance, right? That we are, that we really live in an abundant society where we're blessed with people that have our best interests, and that we're all supporting each other in a positive way? Or does our days defined by a series of petty resentments and vague hostility, right? And if it is, we're not just grateful and happy to be here and to be doing this thing, and we do live in a world where our experience is colored by just petty resentments and kind of vague senses of hostility and resentment, all this kind of stuff. What we're doing is we're producing a reality that is flavored by a certain kind of emotional experience that we have been trained to produce a kind of a mask for, right? Produce a kind of a false image, so that we can have a whole kind of a backlog of problems that we're not dealing with. And then we basically we live our lives in a way that feels fake and false to us because we need to do that in order to survive, right? Gabor Mate, whom you may recognize, I have a number of Gabor Mate books, including The Myth of Normal, as well as this one here called The Hungry Ghosts. This is a second-hand book that's fairly beat up. That this was actually sourced from the downtown East Side, where gone from the street. This is, I haven't read this, but this is obviously a copy that has seen the battle damage, right? This has been a copy of a book that's been through the trenches, right? So we've got all sorts of material here. We've got an abundance of resources to work with, and yet we are day after day. It's a situation of frustration and resentment over the most minor and petty bullshit. And that we have to just kind of like normalize ourselves, that this is we have to just live our lives like this, so that the system that as we know it, can just keep going forever. And we don't have to worry about there being any changes or any like major circumstances which do anything can be different. And so that basically we allow ourselves the opportunity to live the same life day in and day out in a kind of repeating loop where nothing ever changes. And we just have to have this mounting sense of frustration, that we just have to put a happy face on, and because if you want to change anything, it's your responsibility in a very individual, personal sense, right? But we also create a situation where what kind of choices does the individual have in their life? What real control do you have as an individual that doesn't affect what you're doing for all these other interdependent relationships you may have with other people, right? And so, but we just have to find a way to make everything run as smoothly as possible, and put on a fake kind of, with Pluto it's great though, because it's like, it's almost like espionage, right? You can pretend that you are a secret agent, that you don't have to like the enemy, but it's your job to infiltrate them, and you got to work on presenting a kind of a alter ego for the sake of a kind of espionage mission, to work your way behind enemy lines, to plant the secret bomb, or to sabotage things, and then then you can use the forces of repression and obfuscation, as well as the forces of kind of the hidden dynamics, to your benefit, and use the inherent falseness of the situation the way it's supposed to be used, right? And then you can essentially you're not under any pressure to be authentic, because we live in and everybody has to be inauthentic day after day just to make things work, right? And of course everybody's going to be stressed out from having to live an inauthentic life, and so like you just have to accept that that's the way it is, and just roll with it, basically, right? So I'm just, Friedrich Nietzsche, though, basically suggested that there was a kind of a false consciousness behind this, because it's all based around a Christian kind of meekness, like the meek shall inherit the earth, turn the other cheek, forgive other people, all those good, positive Christian values. Nietzsche basically rejected them and said, we're basically living a life where we have to put on all this stuff as if it's true, but we don't actually feel that way. Instead, we're all pissed off, angry, resentful people. So we'd all just feel better if it was just a outright war for power or something like that. But I think that's actually kind of silly. I don't also know if I have to say that maybe I'm getting Nietzsche wrong here, because there is something about this where there is a certain kind of balancing, I think, between these different forces, and that you have to, like, at some point in time, is it basically a bunch of like killer barbarian imperial warlords versus the gentle lamb meek Christians, and that we have to like that we'd all just feel better off if we all were just a bunch of like psychopathic, like Machiavellian sociopaths. I don't think that is I actually think that it's probably better not to live your life like this. But there's something about the polarity, basically, right? Where if you think about the forces of light and darkness, right? Or the forces of like good and evil, that if we have to like, so often the problem is that the forces of good are kind of superficial in nature. Good is basically just like, it's good for me not to tell you what I really think, right? It's good for me not to tell you what I'm actually frustrated about. It's good for me to just be polite, and then if I'll have these outsized reactions about somebody stealing some of my corn chips, or my not respecting the boundaries of my birthday cake or something like that. You had too many slices of my birthday cake and now I'm upset with you in a really childish way because I can't tell you about what the actual stuff that I'm frustrated about. But if we did get into that, there would be a risk of a kind of a Machiavellian showdown or some kind of like, so instead we have to kind of like, if it's too far, but the point is that like you've got these two dynamics that are like, you need to kind of have a bit like shadow projection, right? Is to basically put on that. Shadow projection could actually be helpful because so often it's so much easier to see this in other people than in ourselves, right? That it can be extremely difficult to see your own shadow, but if you just watch other people, it's clearly obvious, right? So that's one of the reasons why I personally have found doing this astrology channel to be a helpful thing, is that I can record these videos, I can watch myself, and I can take a step back and watch, listen to these things that I make, listen to the things I record, and be like, wow, look at me go! I'm really just doing it, right? There's obviously I can sort of see that I can use it as an opportunity for self-reflection and kind of put myself in somebody else's shoes, as there could be people who are watching this thinking all sorts of things that maybe wouldn't occur to me, right? And that, but in the same way that I try to watch certain other astrology videos, and I'm just kind of like, why, it just seems like if there's so many ways that I don't want to, or I don't want to just make it about astrology, but maybe just like content creation in general, right? That there's so many ways that you can do things. Why do we choose to do them like this, right? Is this really the best way that this is how it works, right? It's like, and you can make that about authenticity. You can make that about a kind of a strategy, or you could be like, this is how, well, it's not perfect, but we got to do this. This is how we get views. This is how we get clicks. This is how we make the algorithm work for us. This is how we do it so it's a profitable. There's all these things that we have to do because it's sort of like it's a strategy, or it's a mechanism, or it's some kind of thing that we're obligated to do it this and that way. But it feels kind of like is that. So is that why we have to do it like this? Like can you guys kind of understand that there's something about this that kind of feels like it sucks? Like so this is the welcome to 2025. We're creating this kind of reality. We're doing it this way, and everybody is acting really positive and cheery, but there's some underlying issue that we can never address. That we're basically because we feel powerless to address these issues. And so we have to accept the fact that we don't have much power, we don't have much control over things, we don't have any say over these things, and we have to put on a happy face and then secretly resent things, so that when we do get upset, it's only over things which are petty and childish that don't actually have any real greater significance, right? Like, you just have to be like, so basically, then that just basically goes to prove that you're a baby, basically. You're just a little child that has a little temper tantrum, and that just goes to show we don't have to pay attention to you, right? So, and then we can, adults are the ones that can just be okay with everything being exactly how it is. And that's a sign of maturity, right? So, thanks for watching. That's my advice for how to deal with the Mars-Pluto opposition. Hopefully, I'm not getting to the current event stuff with this. I'm just going with what's on my mind right now. Thanks for watching.